I'd like to talk today about is fusion coloring, a particular method that I've named and coined, although some parts of it come from other sources. And one of the main sources was Rudolf Steiner, a philosopher from kind of the late 19th century, and he came up with this idea of how to teach kids aesthetically so that they would develop this high level of development in the aesthetic line. And he had an approach to color and art. And around that same time, I started exploring how to actually teach this to children and adults. I was a school teacher, so I was watching how children and adolescents in the school I was in, how they color and approach art, how they draw. Their habits started showing up, and I started seeing that the way they were taught, I found it very mechanical, often very boring. The odd student would have great talent and move ahead, but all the rest are sort of struggling at this sort of same level and really didn't have a lot of ideas how to color differently. And so I was starting to try to find ways to show them how to do that. And then I was teaching night classes with their parents sometimes in the school as well, and other adults, finding the same habitual patterns were there. So I pretty much was able to document what those patterns were, and then now how can I intervene as an art teacher or just someone showing them different ways to do it. So I'm going to give you the definition 1985 that I came up with fusion coloring. In this huge big binder I have is all my notes and ideas and different samples of this fusion coloring. But here's the definition. The fusion coloring approach I am researching and advocating is an alternative worldview to the coloring book syndrome, which is the habitual pattern. This does not attempt to replace our current habits or worldview and values, but to supplement them in an attempt to balance the one-sidedness of what I would call the scientific paradigm. First thing I noticed is that adults and children were doing in our society, and I'll just say in the West, is we have a tendency to fill in spaces, and we call that coloring or painting. Fusion coloring, as you look at here, one of the things I'm always getting people to think about is to work from dark to light or light to dark. That's the first thing, because most people, they tend to color like this. If I was to give them a square shape and I say, color this, without no other instructions, they tend to color it very evenly, smoothly in the lines, just like in A model here. Then if I ask them to make it more interesting, well, they'll come up with certain variations. Sometimes they might do something like B, but usually not. Usually they'll just put in little designs or draw pictures of animals or things. They still haven't changed their fundamental way of coloring. They actually don't know how. And that's not their fault, it's just they weren't taught. And then to the C model of coloring, you actually break the boundaries, and I can still create that rectangle shape like A, B, and C, but without making the boundary first, by just moving the crayon back and forth, dark to light. And D is even more complex. You just basically color and move the crayon around, and the outside of the rectangle and the inside of the rectangle are constantly interacting as to where they'll negotiate the end result. The other interesting thing why it's called fusion for me is because when you move into this D model here, the coloring and drawing fuse. So I'm attempting to show how in this example, how to color so that the coloring was more alive, didn't have that mechanical feel, it was more aesthetically beautiful. And this sample here, as I'm showing, basically works from a real intensity of color in a small area and then grading it out. We have a society where we give children very early, myself as well, colored pencils or crayons very early, and we sort of give them as, well, go have fun, do your thing. But we don't actually go through the teaching process of, well, how could you use those instruments, those crayons, in a way just like you would treat a flute or a violin, for example. So this is where Rudolf Steiner in his teaching and philosophy was, we oughtn't to give people instruments or tools until they understand the tool as well. So the idea of the instrument really is again, it's about concentrating on being aware of what you're doing. And so when you get an instrument, just like if it was a flute, you don't just go banging it around or trying to blow into it unless you've learned a few skills. That's how you're going to create beauty. So one of the ways to get quality, I'm just going to go start putting this down, and what I'm focusing on right now, Holding the pencil not like this, how we write. Again, very functional, utilitarian way of handling. I often hold it like this. And so that makes a whole difference because I can get as light as I want, like that kind of light in the toning. You put a little more pressure on, put my thumb down, and then I can get a little bit more, and I can start to control it. Although there might be a time when we're just in a moment, you can see I even changed my hand, which I have to get an intensity. So I might put a piece of intensity into this coloring piece. And then the main thing about fusion coloring is if you do something intense, then you want to bleed it out, or what's called feather coloring or shading. So somebody might ask about this time, well, what the heck are you coloring and what are you drawing? What is it? What does it mean? Well, it doesn't mean anything, and it isn't anything. That's one of the things I really like about this approach. It's not about things, but it's kind of more like just making music, and here I am is just making coloring. So the first thing with the colored pencil crayon, you put it in your hand. What should I color? What should I draw? Kids and adults go through so much anxiety, and it's just because they were never taught just how to have a relationship with this simple process that I'm doing right now. Well, what if it's messy? What if it's not? Well, you can change it. And if you don't like it at some point, throw it away and put out another one. Put another piece of paper down. So again, everything I'm pretty much demonstrating right now are just some of the principles of how to actually be with the instrument. So your attunement to those qualities will help you learn, just like every artist talks about, you have to know your materials to produce good work. Why? Because you're communicating with those materials. You're communicating with this colored pencil and what it can do, and you want to find out what it can do. And all of a sudden, to make it more interesting, I might start putting in a line instead of just the feathering. I might even go like that. And the fusion coloring technique always says, it's a basic principle, is if you're going to make a line, generally, make it so it's dark, and then light. And then from that dark end, keep it dark and move it to light. And all of a sudden you have a line that's alive, it breathes. And the same with music. If you made music always at the same pitch and always at the same volume and the same tone, it's boring. That's how we learn how to mostly color and draw. We haven't learned how to make music in a sense with this art. So that's just a few basics, right? And then at some point I might just go, okay, I'm just kind of, maybe bored with that colored pencil crayon, and I'll pick up another one. I know these ones I'm picking up. I've used them so many times. I sort of know their character and their possibilities, and so I might start to, then put something in with that other color. And now I start having a communication going on. Well, all the options I have here, again, you'll notice I don't have to know how to draw anything. No prerequisite to know how to draw, be a good drawer. Coloring is more beautiful, it's more primal. It's just coloring. What will come from that coloring will be depending on what you learn from the materials, how you practice it, how you concentrate. Does it take patience to do fusion coloring? Yes, it does. So the practice I do at nights is a meditation kind of practice, right? I will sit down with something like this when I just feel like I want to meditate, be quiet, and just let things start to happen. And I start concentrating, and then I start relaxing. My breathing changes, my heart rate changes, I start to relax. Why? Because I'm not anxious about whether I can draw good or not. There's no anxiety. And that's what I'm trying to free up, right? Fearless, in a sense. It's free of a fear-based or an anxious-based performance. And so therefore I actually say I'm not actually trying to make art. I call them aesthetic practice. Aesthetic practice. And that, to me, gets away from trying to make art, because there's a pressure when you try to make art because of what the art world thinks is good art, bad art, and it gets judged. So just imagine if you could actually just enjoy coloring without trying to make art. Most people would probably say that meditation is a practice of working from fear to fearlessness, or lowering anxiety levels. But the process of going through and doing meditation is you have to let go of control. in a certain way. You know, another level, you're taking control, just like with the art. Then at the same time, you'll see a lot of what I was showing in fusion coloring. You have a principle, right? So you're kind of following a guideline, just like in a meditation. Breathe in. You're actually paying attention to your breath in meditation, for example. Same in coloring. Pay attention to dark moving to light, light moving to dark, so you don't get in all the same, right? And then at the same time, you're letting go because you're concentrating. And it's in that letting go many people find very fearful to let go of going into kind of a trance state, as you will eventually, because your ego mind, busy mind, starts to stop or slow down. And some people find that really hard. The ego wants to come back and get control and wants to think and wants to talk and wants to be in charge, right? Just like in the coloring process, I say don't try and make anything, just color. That's really having to go into it, right? Put yourself into it, be with the instrument into it, trust the process, trust the materials, trust that you will be all right. So this is all about some principles to follow, but very much a letting go process. So I think fundamentally it is a practice of fearlessness at the aesthetic level. And it's an embodied because you're using your body and this attention of your hand, your eye, and your sensory system, right? Very finely tuned to what's happening. That's just good concentration practice. If you're aware and you go in to create something beautiful, you know, again, not judging it, oh, this is ugly, it's not beautiful. Just say that my intention is to be in beauty, with beauty. It creates this intimate relationship, and I will frankly say that these are my great friends. This process is my great friends. These crayons are my great friends, just like journaling. None of us wants to go in and face fear alone. When you can actually do it with friends, and then I can actually show something to somebody afterward. This is what some people call extrovert meditation rather than an introvert meditation. They allow me to express and put something out here, right, in relationship with that material. Then I can share it with somebody, which is a great pleasure. There's always a pleasure in that. Of course, there's always the risk. People won't understand it, won't like it. But that's just a risk that's always going to be in life. If you don't want to do that, don't do it. Don't show it. Save it. So this one originally looked a lot plainer. It had a lot of the elements in this piece. And I just got to it and I said, well, it's okay, but it's not, great. It's not working the way I wanted it. So I left it for, probably a month or so, just in a pile of sort of okay ones, half finished or whatever. And then I picked it up one day and I just had different kind of patience and I was feeling different. And I went in and I started adding things. So for example, I added this just orange dot actually. It's just a stationary dot that you can stick on things and books and stuff, and then I painted on it and drew on it a little bit, colored it to make it look more alive. And then I realized, well, I've got that orange light going to be casting from what could be a moon, or it could be just a light source. And so then I ended up sort of drawing and painting in these little sort of shapes with that same kind of color. And then I went down and fixed a few other things, and see, it's all of a sudden then the piece was worth keeping. I said, well, now it's more interesting. So there will be pieces that you do that, are just not so interesting. I'm not saying they're not beautiful. They're just not beautiful and interesting. So now you can see the light playing off from this, kind of hitting across on the bits and edges of those. And again, you create light by just using light colored when you're on a black surface. But even on a white surface, it's got to be light. And if you want shadow, it's going to be darker. So fusion coloring is all about light and dark, and that is the most fundamental principle on the whole planet and in the universe. It's light and dark and the combinations between, and they create interesting things. It's an amazing world what lights and darks will do.